All right, so this is going to be a practice question set for the changing American culture from 1900 to 1945. All right, number one, what organization was formed in the 1920s to ensure that individual rights of citizens were protected from government abuse? In other words, they go out, they file lawsuits and provide legal services for people who are being discriminated against or whose rights are being violated. Let's look at the answers here. House Un-American Activities Committee. That doesn't even make sense. We can remove A, okay, because we're not talking about un-American activities. All right. B, the American Civil Liberties Union. Okay, that makes sense. That seems just not knowing anything about it, just hearing the words seems like it makes sense. So we'll hold on to B. C, the American Liberties League. All right, again, that theoretically could mean it, but it's more along the lines of talking about freedom. So we probably eliminate C. D, United Services Organization. No clue. Again, that's later on that goes on to help soldiers, but it doesn't really talk any or do anything about individual rights. This is going to be the ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union. Number two, Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement and the creation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, were both early 20th century responses to what? In other words, why did they do all this? Let's go ahead and try to formulate an answer before we even look at the choices. Why would African Americans look to go back to Africa? Or why was the NAACP created in the first place? Okay, let's look here. A, the passage of more restrictive immigration laws. Now, that has nothing to do with it, so we can remove that. B, the growth of communism in the South. That's probably going to be it, but let's hold on to it for a minute. The practice of racial discrimination. Hold on here. This is a perfect example of not reading something closely enough. I've transposed the words communism and discrimination because they're right on top of each other. B is definitely not it. We didn't have communism growing in the South. See, this is an example why you need to pay close attention when you're reading this stuff. I know this. I'm the one that put this question on here. I know the answer. It's just a matter of I could have missed it very easily because I did not take the time to read it carefully. C, the practice of racial discrimination in the United States. That makes sense. Hold on to that one. D, the desegregation of World War One combat units. World War One combat units were all white. In fact, African Americans only served in support roles in World War One, and the military wasn't desegregated until after World War Two. So the answer to this one's going to be C. Plus, desegregation is not going to be something that makes people, you know, want to fight for their rights. Desegregation is what they're going for. All right, number three. Why did the number of votes cast in the U.S. presidential election rise by 8.2 million from 1916 to 1920? In other words, why did 8 million more people vote? This one's pretty simple, okay? It's the 19th Amendment. It gave millions of women the right to vote, okay? So the passage of the 19th Amendment is what opens up, it makes the electorate bigger. Number four, Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes had which of the following in common? Okay, these are both African American writers, okay, in the 1920s. Okay, so let's see here. They were leaders involved in the 1960 Civil Rights Movement. No, they weren't around. They were initial members of President Franklin Roosevelt's Black Cabinet. Now, these were writers, they weren't politicians or leaders. They were writers associated with the Harlem Renaissance. They were, so let's hold on to C. D, they were outspoken opponents to the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. That one's just absurd. So the answer to this one is going to be C. All right, number five. Authors Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald are identified with what? Um, it's this era right after, or basically, it's all those that fought in World War One. World War One, you had millions of people die worldwide, and then in the year following World War One, you also had a huge um, flu epidemic sweep through the world and kill millions more. I believe it was something like 18 million Americans were killed by the flu the following year. So it was some really, really trying times. This generation becomes known as the lost generation, and these are lost generation writers. They're people that are disenfranchised with Victorian values. They are, a lot of them, suffering from PTSD. They saw things that they never wanted to see before, never thought they would see, and this really takes a toll on them, and it really affects the perspective from which they write. So this is going to be A, the lost generation. Number 6, the map shows the percentage change in African American population from 1890 to 1920. Which is the most likely reason for the change shown in the map? If you look at the map, the percentage of African Americans in the South goes down, but the percentage of African Americans in the North goes up. Again, we see a reoccurring theme. Why do people in this country move? They move for jobs. So it's going to be B, increased job opportunities in northern states. Number 7, use the following statement to answer the questions. All right, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution became law of the land in January 1920. Okay, the 18th Amendment banned alcohol. Um, this noble experiment, as it is called, is considered by most to have been a dismal failure. The noble experiment, again, would be prohibition. Many believe that the 18th Amendment gave birth to the rise of organized crime and created more problems than it solved. Again, all these statements are talking about prohibition. Um, if anything, during prohibition, the demand for alcohol in this country went up. Okay, so the idea of stopping people from drinking, that was an utter failure, and it was a bit absurd. To be honest with you, even today, most of the common cocktails that people make today or buy or sell or whatever were invented during the Prohibition era because they were making homemade alcohol that was so bad they were trying to find ways to mask the taste. Okay, so literally, Prohibition actually did more to popularize drinking than it did to stop it. Not to mention, if legitimate businesses aren't making money selling alcohol, criminals will be. While we're at this, just for a little food for thought here, think about our war on drugs and how much money we've spent, and how, because we've made everything illegal, we've simply just created bigger business for drug cartels. I'm not saying drugs should be legal, but I'm just saying very similar situation. All right, number 8. The photograph shows a common form of entertainment in the 1920s. Okay, somebody's listening to a radio. All right, the photograph could be used in a museum exhibit about which trend in American history. All right, so let's look here. A, the rise in mass culture. B, the rise in youth-based counterculture. This had nothing to do with counterculture. C, the role of urbanization in preserving traditional culture. No, it has nothing to do with this picture. The role of immigrants in the formation of urban culture. Again, nothing to do with this picture. It's the rise of mass culture. Now remember, mass culture is this idea that at once the entire nation is listening to the same music, wearing the same types of clothing, the same things are popular. This is mass culture. The reason that the radio contributes to it is it's a way to disseminate music and information and news much quickly than it had been in years past. Okay, so that's the rise of mass culture. A. Number 9. In what way did farm mechanization affect population migration in the 20th century? All right, stop. Let's try to answer this before we even look here. All right, let's just break it down. Migration. What causes migration in this country? Again, jobs. If people can find jobs somewhere, they move there. Okay? Now, farm mechanization. What that means is rather than doing everything on the farm by hand, now we have tractors. Now we have machines to actually do a lot of this work. So now, instead of needing 500 men to work on a 5,000 acre farm, now the same amount of work is being done with 10 or 15 men armed with tractors. Okay, so this is going to create a shortage of jobs in rural areas. And if there's no jobs in rural areas, what are these farm workers going to do? These farm workers are going to leave and go find jobs somewhere, probably in cities. So let's sit here and look and see if we can see if these answer choices line up. A, it allowed more acreage to be farmed and increased the demand for farm workers. All right, yes, it allowed more acreage to be farmed, but it decreased the demand for farm workers. You didn't need as many to work it. B, it reduced the money needed to farm profitably and encouraged more people to go into farming. Quite the opposite. Farming becomes more expensive, and only big farms are able to make a profit, so it's not going to be B. C, it created a flood of rural jobs needed to build and maintain the machinery farmers used. Again, no, it cut rural jobs. It didn't create rural jobs. D, it meant fewer workers could farm more acres and resulted in large-scale migration to the cities. What do you think? To me, that sounds exactly like what we thought it was. D. Number 10, from 1919 to 1920, people in the United States were caught up in the Red Scare, which was the fear of what? Go ahead and get it in your mind that anytime you see red, it probably refers to communism. Okay? So if you look up here, which one of those has anything to do with communism? It's going to be B. Okay, the government was being influenced by communists, so people thought. All right, number 11. It is my belief that while they have stirred discontent in our midst, while they have caused irritating strikes, and while they have infected our social ideas with the disease of their own minds and their unclean morals, we can rid of them, or we can get rid of them. And not until we have done so shall we have removed the menace of Bolshevism, communism, for good. Okay, this is Attorney General Andrew Mitchell Palmer. Okay, he's talking about communism. He's talking about the idea that, by the way, go ahead and you hear the word Bolshevik or Bolshevism that refers to communism. Um, what's he talking about? He's talking about we need to get rid of them. Okay, so if we look down here in the quotation above, Attorney General explained the reason for what. Okay, well the Scopes trial had to do with teaching evolution in public schools, so we can remove that. C. The internment of Japanese Americans. That doesn't happen until 1942. So we can get rid of that. The passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was in the late 1800s. So it's going to be the Red Scare again. Remember the Red Scare dealing with communism. All right, the phrase baby boom refers to a pop. Okay, baby boom. Anytime we hear a boom, things are going up. Okay, so baby numbers are going up. In other words, we have more people being born. Okay, it's an increase in birth rate after World War II. You got to think, a lot of young people were shipped straight off to war during World War II, and they really put their lives on hold. And because of this, a lot of them didn't have families early on. So as soon as they got home from war, one of the first things that they did was start a family. Okay, this leads up to the largest generation in U.S. history, which is known as the baby boomers. Okay, and these are people born after World War II. All right, this table summarizes cultural characteristics of the 1920s. All right, traditionalism. This is over here on the left side. Women as homemakers, belief in creationism, support of temperance. So these are standard, normal views of the day. Then you have modernism. These are women working, the belief in evolution, and what else would fall in line with that? Okay, what's the opposite of temperance? Right. Remember, temperance is a fancy word for not drinking. So which feature of the 1920s replaces the question mark in the table? Okay. Um, Emphasis on agrarian values. That would go with the traditionalism, so we can remove that. The popularity of speakeasies. Speakeasies were illegal hidden bars. Okay. So this kind of flies directly in the face of the support for temperance. So this could fit. So let's hold on to that one. Support for prohibition. Well, support for prohibition is the same as saying the support for temperance. Or the use of referendum. Nothing to do with this. Okay, so it's going to be the thing about the speakeasies. All right, what did the flapper image of the 1920s represent for U.S. women? All right, remember, flappers were the personification of women with modern views and modern values. Okay, so it didn't really represent changing religious roles. But what it did represent, and this is going to be B, this is pretty simple, is a challenge to traditional values. In other words, the flapper went against everything that they'd been taught that was what was proper and what they had to do. Number 15. Okay, we have a Harlem Renaissance timeline here. All right, you just look through it really quickly. How was the Harlem Renaissance a turning point in U.S. society? In other words, how did it affect it? Okay. A. It allowed African American artists to escape the effects of the Great Depression. The Harlem Renaissance really happened before the Great Depression, so it's not that one. B. It helped African Americans find artistic careers in southern cities. Harlem's in New York, not in the South. Okay, so it's not B. C. It gave exposure to African American writings, art, music, and acting and dance. Okay, that makes sense. Hold on to C. D. It offered preferential treatment to African American stage actors. No, it was C. Okay, it really showcased um, the arts amongst African Americans to the rest of the country. Not just the rest of the country. A lot of these Harlem Renaissance artists, they became huge worldwide. I mean, a lot of the musicians and stuff toured all over the world. All right, number 16. What was a challenge to religious fundamentalism in the 1920s? Okay, so what challenged our typical problems, our typical, our traditional religious beliefs? Okay, A. The sermons of Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday was a preacher. That's not going to challenge fundamentalism or traditionalism. B. The teachings of John T. Scopes. John T. Scopes, we can go back and realize he's associated with a Supreme Court case which is nicknamed the Scopes Monkey Trial, specifically about evolution. That right there that shows that would be a direct challenge to religious fundamentalism. Okay, so it's going to be B, the teachings of John Scopes. All right, number 17. All right, use the following list to answer the questions. Okay, the key developments for the United States in the 1920s: easy credit and the rise of consumer debt. In other words, you could borrow money really, really easily, and because of this, a lot of people went into debt. Or growing unemployment in key industries such as construction. So a lot of people are losing jobs, especially in construction. So nobody's building anything new. Overproduction and declining farm income. Well, farm prices are going down and there's more and more products available. Okay, well, from a consumer standpoint, it seems good. Buying stocks on margin, in other words, borrowing money, and then stock prices just going up like out of control. Okay, so what were all these things a sign of? Okay, what was significant about the development shown above in the 1920s? Okay, A, they were causes for World War II. No, none of this had anything really to do with World War II, so we can move on. B, they were signs of difficulties within the U.S. economy. Unemployment, overproduction, declining profits, soaring stock prices, but people buying stocks on margin, and the rise of debt. Yeah, that all sounds like B. C. They demonstrated the ability of the Federal Reserve to control the money supply. This had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. Or D. They led to legislation restricting immigration. Seriously? Not even. There's no reason to even finish that. Okay, it's going to be B.